This is a reminder of a little Easter basket. And my oldest daughter, Anna, back a couple of churches ago when she was about 3 years of age, 4 years of age, and I was a pastor in Kentucky. And at that particular church, they would have an Easter egg hunt, okay? Now, I'm not here to promote or prohibit Easter egg hunts. You sort all that out. But at this particular church, we had Easter egg hunts. And Anna would, she would stand with her basket like this, and she sucked these 2 middle fingers right here. And she sucked those 2 middle fingers till it was an embarrassing age. I mean, she was up there. But she'd go like that. And so she would be sucking these 2 fingers, and so I'd try to help her, when she's like 3 or 4 years of age, they kind of break it down. The 3-year-olds go here, the 4-year-olds go over here, and the 5-year-olds over here, because you don't want, everybody trampling. And when the door opened into this particular room, all the kids, all the eggs are in there, Anna didn't get it. She just stood there like that. And I was behind her saying, go in there, honey, come on. Pick up some eggs. They're going to be all gone, Easter egg hunts are cutthroat competition. It's like, it's worse than church softball league. I mean, it's bad. So, and she just standing there like that. And so she would kind of mosey over and, after all the good eggs are gone, and she would pick up an egg and she'd put it in a basket like that. And so she came away with just a few. So next year comes along and we're going to be ready this year. So we had a little practice session. We practiced hunting Easter eggs. So I would get some eggs and I went out in the yard and I put a few down and I said, now here's your basket. I said, now tomorrow they're going to open the door and you just lunge in there as quickly as you can. And you just pick up as many eggs as possible and you put them in your basket, okay? Now, Anna felt like, and I've laughed about that, and we've laughed about that together as a family through the years. And I guess as a father, I didn't want my child to experience failure. As a dad, you don't want your child to fail. That's very important. You don't want your children to have a sense of, I failed at something. And so, I was trying to help her understand the importance of being able to do something, competently. Anna didn't feel like she was failing. Anna, in her mind, she was wondering, why is everybody acting so crazy? She was seeing a very important life lesson early in life, and that's the greedy nature of humanity and the competitive nature of her father. But I didn't want her to be left behind. I didn't want her to miss out. And besides, she shared her Easter candy with me, which is another very important life lesson I taught her early on. We share our candy. Here's what I did. I did a poor job at communicating this to Anna at that time. But here's what I wanted her to understand. We are usually not defeated by opponents from without. We're usually defeated by ourselves from within. We're usually not defeated with opponents from without. We're usually defeated by ourselves from within. The greatest battle that you and I wage against any sense of failure in our life occurs on the inside, not on the outside. A once popular television host said these words, "Looking back, my life seems like one long obstacle race with me as its chief obstacle." You see, when we're young, like Anna, failure doesn't affect us much. Failure doesn't really affect children and little kids that much. I mean, no 1-year-old stumbles when he tries to walk and says to himself, well, that was stupid and clumsy of me. I guess I wasn't cut out to be a walker. I sure don't want anybody else to watch me fall. I'm going to settle for crawling for the rest of my life rather than put myself through that again. Children are content to put up with unsteadiness and falling on the way to walking. That's why we call them toddlers. It's all they're capable of doing. We expect, and they expect, to toddle. Well, for the past couple of weekends, we've been looking at the story of Peter walking on the water with Jesus. We don't know how long this walk lasted. But it would have to be arguably the most memorable walk ever recorded in the Bible. But what we've learned so far is that Peter was really more of a water toddler than he was a water walker. His steps, like his faith, were uncertain. He was willing to risk failure for the adventure of trusting Jesus more fully, but he finally succumbs to his fear of the wind and the waves. But it's important that we know Jesus does not treat Peter's failure as grounds for dismissal. No, he rescues him and lovingly rebukes him. One Bible scholar pointed out, Jesus does scold Peter, but Jesus saves before he scolds. And both the saving and the scolding are evidence of Jesus' love for Peter. Now, here's an important question I want you to think of this morning. Why is it for some people failure is energizing, while for others failure is paralyzing? Why is it for some people failure is energizing, and for others it's paralyzing? I mean, all of us experience failure, and none of us like it. But for some people, it becomes a motivator to push them on to new ideas, deeper persistence, and more vigorous commitment. For others, failure produces a sense of utter defeat, a sense of discouragement, a loss of hope, a desire to hide, and a secret resolve that never, ever, ever again step out of the boat. People's perceptions and responses to failure make an enormous difference in their lives. I think more so than IQ, physical attractiveness, charm, and financial assets combined. Those who learn from failure retain a deep sense of their own value, and they marshal the motivation to try again. John Maxwell wrote a book several years ago called Failing Forward. And Maxwell says in that book, it doesn't matter whether your objectives are in the area of art, business, ministry, sports, or relationship. The only way you get ahead in life is to fail early, fail often, and fail forward. I like that. Fail early, fail often, fail forward. One of the guys in our tech booth sent me something last night after the service. This was great. We couldn't bring it up for you, but this is a commercial that was done by Nike several years ago, or not that many years ago. The athlete says, I've missed over 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost over 300 games in my career. I've taken over 26 game-winning shots and missed. I failed over and over again. And that's why I succeed. You know who that athlete is? Michael Jordan. Exactly. Michael Jordan. Elbert Hubbard said, a failure is a man who blundered but is not able to cash in on the experience. Friends, listen to me. The only time you truly fail is when you don't learn anything. Dr. William Mayo put it best when he said, Lord, deliver me from the man who's never made a mistake, and also from the man who makes the same mistake over and over and over. Psychologist Daniel Goleman cites a number of studies that identify the very top performers in various fields from athletics to music. What sets them apart, he notes, is the doggedness that stems from certain emotional traits, particularly enthusiasm and persistence, he says, in the face of setbacks above all else. Now, here's what I want to do this morning. I want us to look at how this trait came into play in one of the most adventuresome men who ever lived in the Bible. His name is King David. Now, David, if you know much about him, he's not one who's usually associated with failure. For a long time, David experienced an astonishing string of successes. He was anointed by Samuel to be king of Israel when he was just a boy. As a teenager, he defeated a giant that launched him to instant celebrity status. King Saul chose him as his personal musician and ultimately made him his military chief of staff. The army loved him. The people sang songs about him. Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s, they chanted. David knew what it was like to walk on water emotionally and spiritually speaking. He trusted God with all of his heart. And for a long stretch of time, everything King David touched turned to gold. And then a strange thing happened. One by one, all those wonderful things he had been given were systematically stripped away. David lost his job. He had been promoted from shepherd to court musician to army commander, but somewhere along the way, his boss, Saul, became threatened and jealous of David to the point that his suspicious mind drove him mad. David's first clue came when Saul, in a rage, threw a spear at him. I'd say that's a sure sign your contract's not going to be renewed. You've probably heard some of these signs and know it's going to be a bad day. It's going to be a bad day when your twin sister forgets your birthday. You see a 60 Minutes news team waiting in your outer office. You turn on the news and they're displaying emergency routes out of your city. You wake up to discover your waterbed broke and you realize you don't have a waterbed. I think we could add to that list, your boss throws a spear at you. It's going to be a bad day. David soon finds himself out of a job with no income, no security. Next, he loses his wife. Some of you avid Bible readers will remember that one of the perks David was given for slaying the giant Goliath was Saul's daughter, Michal, to be his bride. So Saul is not only David's crazy boss, he's his crazy father-in-law. It's a bad combination. Saul sent soldiers to David and Michal's house to kill David. Michal helps David escape. And then in an act that it can only be described as pure evil, Saul takes her from David's house and forces her to marry someone else. So David is jobless. He's wifeless. He's homeless. He's on the run. He first goes to a city called Ramah, where his spiritual mentor, Samuel, lived. Samuel was the one who anointed David to be the next king of Israel. Samuel assured David of God's presence in his life. David knew Samuel would be a safe person. Saul heard of David's whereabouts, and he sent soldiers after him. David had to make another escape, and Samuel, who was an old man at this point, he could not run with him. In fact, the Bible says many days later, Samuel died. Next, David ran to his best friend, Jonathan, but here's one thing you need to know about Jonathan. Jonathan is Saul's son. Do you see how messy and complicated all this is? Jonathan is torn in what to do. He tried to defend his friend David before his dad, but ultimately Jonathan could not bring himself to leave his father's court. And when it became apparent to Jonathan that his father would not rest until David was dead, he sorrowfully said goodbye to David and he sent him away. So David's job, his marriage, ended in failure. His mentor died. His best friend is out of his life, and then things really got bad. David fled from his homeland, and he sought refuge in the city of Gath, a Philistine city. The Israelites' mortal enemies, and the hometown of the late giant Goliath, who died at the end of David's slingshot. David, hiding among the Philistines, would be like Superman seeking asylum on the planet Kryptonite. What is he doing there? In the end, this move didn't turn out to be any more successful than the others, and David was once again on the run. He finally escaped to a place called the Cave of Adullam. You know, whereas once David had wealth and power and fame and friends and security and what he thought was a guaranteed future, now he's running for his life and he's living in a cave. I want you to look at this picture real quickly. See that picture? I took that picture in Israel. That is that's in the Dead Sea region. It's not far up the road from the Dead Sea. Just to the east of where we were standing there is the Jordan River, the plains along the Jordan River. But then you go into a barren, stark, dangerous looking wilderness, mountainous like that. And if you can see up into the dark recesses, there's a little bitty stream of water that was coming down, and there's a hole behind it. And some Bible scholars believe if it was not that cave, it was a cave like that one in this region where David hid. The Cave of Adullam. John Ortberg says we might think of it as the cave of failure. He writes, the cave is where you end up when your dreams are shattered. The cave is where you end up when you've lost someone you don't think you can live without. The cave is where you end up when you lose your hope. The cave is where you end up when you feel so alone that you just want to crawl into a hole and die. Perhaps you're in a cave right now. Perhaps you're in a cave because of foolish choices. Perhaps you're in a cave because of circumstances that you could not control. Most likely it's a combination of the two, but for whatever reason, you're in a cave. And if you're not in the cave right now, then I would say, then wait a while, you probably will be. Now, nobody plans on ending up in a cave, but sooner or later everybody logs some cave time. The hardest thing about being in the cave is that you begin to wonder whether God has lost track of you. Did He forget His promises? Does He even remember who I am? Will I ever be anywhere but in this cave? Will I die here? However, here's one thing that I want us to learn this morning. Here's one thing that you need to know about life in a cave, and it's this very principle. The cave is where God does some of His best work. Everybody say that with me right now. The cave is where God does some of His best work. You know, sometimes when all the props, when all the crutches in your life get stripped away, and you find out that there's only God, you discover that God is enough. Sometimes when your worst fears about yourself are confirmed, and it's painfully revealed to you that you're out of your league and in way over your head, you experience the liberating truth that says, when I am weak, God is strong. His grace is really sufficient for me. Sometimes the cave is where you meet God because God does some of His best work in caves. How did David deal with his time in the cave? Well, Psalms, chapters specifically 142 and 57, give us some answers. The heading of Psalms 142 and 57 read like this: a maskil. That's some sort of ancient musical term because David was a musician. A maskil of David when he was in a cave. A prayer. So that tells us these particular Psalms are associated with the cave era of David's life. This was the cry of David's heart when he felt overwhelmed by failure. These Psalms are for cave dwellers. I want to read Psalm 142. Psalm 142. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before Him. Before Him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who know my way. In the path where I walk, men have hidden a snare for me. Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. I want you to see this morning several responses that David makes to caves in his life. Here's the first one. He ventilates vertically. He ventilates vertically. He cries out to the Lord. In other words, he complains to God. He confesses to God. He cries before God. He tells God exactly what's on his mind and what's in his heart. Old Testament scholars who've studied Psalms for years, they've categorized the Psalms. They say there's different kinds of Psalms within the collection of the 150 Psalms. For example, some of the Psalms are Psalms of thanksgiving. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for His love endures forever. Some of the Psalms are called enthronement Psalms, which are written about the king and people going to worship. Some of the Psalms are wisdom Psalms, but did you know the single most popular category of Psalms in the Bible is called Psalms of Lament? In other words, the most frequent Psalm in the Bible consists of somebody complaining to God. That figures, doesn't it? Some people believe complaining is their spiritual gift. And apparently, God is okay with that. God allows people to do this. In fact, He encourages it. This is what David does in the cave. He gets quiet enough before the Lord to get to the bottom of his pain and discouragement, and what he feels in his gut, he expresses with his mouth. Many people never get authentic enough to do this. Instead of honestly addressing our failures, we seek to bury our discouragement deep down inside. We put on a spiritual facade. We force some fake smiles, but we're dying inside. Why do we do this? Failure carries with it a sense of shame. And it's a shame not just of having experienced failure, but of being looked at as a failure. Did you know William Shakespeare's body is buried in a churchyard in Stratford-upon-Avon, 18 feet underground? Did you know that? They wanted to bury his remains deeper than the customary 6 feet under because they wanted to make sure nobody would dig them up again. And that's what many of us try to do with our failures. We live by this motto: if at first you don't succeed, destroy any evidence revealing that you ever tried. Rather than owning our failures and learning from them, we want to bury them so deep no one would ever guess that it happened. What we need to learn to pray is a psalm of lament. We need to ventilate vertically, because here's what I'm going to do after I give you these responses of David. I'm going to give you some cave-conquering convictions. And here's my first cave-conquering conviction to you today. When I talk it out with God, I won't take it out on people. Everybody say that with me right now. When I talk it out with God, I won't take it out on people. Listen to me. Feelings of failure strike a deep emotional chord within us, and that emotion is going to go somewhere. To lash out at others is cruel and irrational. To bottle all that up inside is hazardous to your health. The only profitable thing to do is to pour out your heart to your Heavenly Father, R-rated words and all, and after all, He knows what's in your heart anyway. He's been around for a while. God's listened to a lot of frustrated people, you know that? He can handle a little venting. And you know what? I believe He's honored when we take our deepest frustrations and hurts to Him. To me, that's an expression of trust. Let me ask you a question. When you're discouraged, when you're hurting, when you're close to throwing in the towel, who do you want to talk to? You want to talk to somebody who barely knows you, who may misjudge your motives or your character? Or do you want to talk to somebody who knows the real you, who's going to love you regardless of what you say or do? That kind of honest communication is necessary if you're going to develop intimacy with God. The reality is feelings of failure will drive you somewhere. Let it drive you closer to God. Fail forward, or we could say here, fail upward. Did you know there was another great man of God one day who found himself in a cave? His name was the prophet Elijah. Elijah was a wildly successful prophet for God. He took on 400 false prophets of the idol Baal and won. In one of the most dramatic showdowns in the Bible, Elijah stood alone for God, and he called a nation to repent. But the opposition of a single queen triggered a severe panic attack and sent Elijah running scared. Maybe he'd been running on adrenaline too long. Maybe he just had a weak moment. At any rate, he was suddenly gripped with fear. He was certain he'd been a failure, and he pleaded for God to take his life. But God graciously did not take his life. If you're familiar with the Bible, God had a plan for Elijah to go out with a little more style later on. God treated him very tenderly. He had an angel bake him a cake, which is the first angel food cake in history. I just want you Bible scholars to note that. Then the angel directed the strung-out prophet to get some sleep. Basically, God treated Elijah the way you do a cranky toddler. Have a snack, take a nap, we'll talk when you calm down. You will live to toddle another day. Elijah went up to a mountain and he went into a cave. And the Lord said, I'm about to pass by. You remember that phrase? Now, we've looked at this phrase before when we've studied this story of Jesus and Peter walking on the water. The Bible says Jesus came walking on the water and was intending to pass them by. Why was he trying to race them? Was he trying to impress them? Was he messing with them? No. This phrase, pass by, the Lord passing by, means something. And what does it mean? It means God is about to reveal His glory. And so the prophet Elijah in the cave sees a great wind, there's an earthquake, there's a fire, and then came the sound of a still small voice. It was the voice of God, and the voice of God confronted and comforted and recommissioned his conflicted prophet. God was with Elijah in the cave. Now, there were many other times in Elijah's life when he knew God was with him. When Elijah defied the prophets of Baal and saw fire fall from heaven and consume a water-soaked altar full of animals in response to a single prayer. When he foretold the end of a 3-year drought. When he revived a widow's deceased child. When he outran a chariot. When he told the king off and got away with it. He knew God was with him. But perhaps the cave is the most wonderful place of all to find that you're truly loved by God. Listen to me. If you know, if you really know that you're loved by God, even when you feel the weight of failure, then there's no place that you'll ever be that's beyond the confines of His care. It's exactly what David discovered, and he affirms in the cave. First, he ventilates vertically, and then he communicates confidently. Psalm 142:3. When my spirit goes faint within me, it is you who know my way. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. One of the great gifts failure can give us is the recognition that we're loved and valued by God precisely when we are in the cave of failure. You see, as long as my sense of value, as long as my sense of significance is tied to my success, it will always be a very fragile thing. But when I come to know in the depths of my spirit that I'm just as valued and loved by God when I fall flat on my face, then I'm gripped by a love that is stronger than either success or failure. So here is cave conquering conviction number 2. When I am most low, God is still most high. Everybody say that with me right now. When I am most low, God is still most high. In Psalm 57, verse 2, David wrote from the cave, I cry out to God most high, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. You know, the title God Most High has a long history in the Bible. It goes back to Abraham's time when he met a mysterious man named Melchizedek, who simply identified as a priest of God Most High. When the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, he said that Jesus, who would be born through her, would be great and called the Son of the Most High. The Lord is God Most High. He's far superior to all else. He towers above any other physical or spiritual power in the universe. No human idol comes close. No problem's too big for God. No human philosophies can match his wisdom. God himself said in Isaiah 55:9, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And yet, God Most High is willing to stoop down and hear our prayers when life caves in on us. It's ironic that the drug culture that emerged so pronounced in the 1960s coined the phrase, getting high. Drugs certainly do make you high at first, but eventually they bring you down. An exciting ball game can make you feel pumped up. A suspenseful movie can get your adrenaline flowing. A fast jog on a brisk morning gives you a runner's high, but eventually you come down from physical, emotional, and even spiritual highs, and often you land in a cave. What then? Where do you turn in the down times? David turned to Most High God. Remember the story? I told you this story a few weeks ago. I don't remember how long ago, but I told you a story about a little boy named Billy who fell off a pier that extended into a chilly lake at a family reunion. The noise of the family reunion was going on. Nobody really saw it happen, but Billy's mom, those moms are tuned in to where those kids are. Billy's mom heard a splash, and she cried for help. Billy's dad ran down the shore, jumped off the pier into the murky water. He tried to locate him, but he couldn't find him, and so he surfaced. He gulped some more air. He dove down under again, and he found his 5-year-old son hugging a post of the pier about 8 feet under the surface of the water, just hugging this post. And he pried his fingers loose, and they swam to the surface, and he was fully revived. And his mother said to him, Billy, what in the world were you doing down there? He said, I was just waiting on Daddy to come and get me. David wrote in Psalm 142:6, listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need. Rescue me. It sure sounds to me like David is saying, I'm just waiting on you, Daddy, to come and rescue me. When I am most low, God is still most high and willing to rescue me. David's pattern for dealing with the cave of failure: ventilate vertically, communicate confidently, and then activate authentically. In any arena, when you're dealing with feelings of failure, the single most destructive thing to do is nothing. One psychologist writes about what he calls the cycle of lethargy. When I'm faced with a challenge and I do nothing, it leads to distorted thoughts, that I'm hopeless, helpless, and beyond change. These then in turn lead to destructive emotions, a loss of energy, motivation, damaged self-esteem. I feel overwhelmed. The end result is self-defeating behaviors, procrastination, avoidance, and escapism. These behaviors then reinforce the negative thoughts we have about ourselves, and the whole cycle just spirals downward, and then it takes over our lives. The good news is that God has made us in such a way that taking even one single step of action can be extremely potent in robbing failure of its power. Just one single step of positive action. In Psalm 142 and 57, we see David take several positive action steps. For example, he cries out to God. He praises. He sings. He plays his musical instruments. He gathers with other believers who will affirm his faith. He activates authentically. He takes some positive steps to address his desperate situation. Now, here's what someone said I've never forgotten. He said, you don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to be great. Isn't that right? You don't have to be great to start, but if you don't start, you'll never be great. Your life will never change. For example, take marital failure. Way too common in our society, even in the church. Psychologist Neil Warren says lack of hope is what kills a marriage more than any other factor. I completely agree with him. Lack of hope. When hope dies, the motivation to change dies and people quit trying. At that point, the death of the marriage is just a matter of time. Dr. Warren recommends focusing on one area of your marriage where you're discouraged and aim for only a 10% improvement in 12 months. Now think about that. If you can improve 10%, which is by no means an overwhelming goal, you will have gained something much more important than the progress. You will have gained some hope that things can change and get better. If a couple can experience any noticeable improvement as a result of their efforts, he says, they realize they're not powerless victims and that they just fell out of love. No, hope gets born, and hope trumps discouragement. Always. Hope trumps discouragement. A man named Parker Palmer writes about a time in his life when he experienced the cave of depression. His action step was to participate in a program called Outward Bound. I don't know if you know about Outward Bound. It's sort of an extreme sports camp that instills confidence and courage. He writes, I chose the week-long course at Hurricane Island off the coast of Maine. I should have known from that name what was in store for me. He said, next time I'll sign up for Happy Gardens or Pleasant Valley. In the middle of the week, I faced a challenge I feared most. One of our instructors backed me up to the edge of a cliff, 110 feet above solid ground. He tied a very thin rope that looked ill-kept to me and seemed to be unraveling and told me to start rappelling down that cliff. Do what? I asked. Just go. The instructor shouted in typical Outward Bound fashion. So I went and immediately slammed into a ledge some 4 feet down from the edge of the cliff with bone-jarring force. The instructor looked down at me and he said, I don't think you've quite got it. So what am I supposed to do? This is the only way to do it, he said, is this. If you've ever rappelled, you know exactly what I'm about to tell you. It's so true. You lean back as far as you can. You get your body at right angles to the cliff so that your weight is on your feet. It's completely counterintuitive, but it's the only way it works. Palmer says, I knew he was wrong, of course. I knew that the trick was to hug the mountain, to stay as close to the face of the rock as I could. So I tried it again my way and slammed into the next ledge, another 4 feet down. You still don't have it. The instructor said helpfully, lean way back and take the next step. The next step was a very big one, but I took it, and wonder of wonders, it worked. I leaned back into empty space, my eyes fixed on the heavens in prayer, made tiny moves with my feet, and I started descending down the rock face, gaining confidence with every step. I was just about halfway down when the second instructor called up from below, Parker, I think you'd better stop and see what's just below your feet. I lowered my eyes very slowly and saw I was approaching a deep hole in the face of the rock. To get down, I would have to get around the hole, which meant I could not maintain the straight line of descent that I had become very comfortable with. I would need to change course and swing myself around the hole. I knew for a certainty that attempting to do so would lead directly to my death, so I froze, paralyzed in fear. But then the instructor shouted 10 words that I hope to never forget. And these next 10 words are cave-conquering conviction number 3. Here they are. If you can't get out of it, get into it. If you can't get out of it, get into it. You say, what in the world does that mean? Well, let me tell you what it means. This is your life, friend. This is your life. No helicopter is going to come and whisk you away. No genie's going to pop out of a bottle and give you 3 magical wishes. There is no magic eraser that will take away all those bad mistakes that you have made in your life, and they're all just going to disappear. This is your life. You can't get out of it. So get into it. Take one step trusting God in an area where you feel failure. Conrad Hilton once said, success seems to be connected with action. Successful people keep moving. However, there is one more truth about life in a cave that we have to acknowledge. Sometimes there is no way out. Sometimes you're in a cave and no human solution you can concoct is going to get you out of it. There's something so broken you can't fix. There's something hurt so deeply you can't heal it. There's something so all-consuming you can't escape it. All you can do is trust God. And so here's what you do. You elevate eternity. You elevate eternity. I think that's what David means when he calls God his refuge. God hides us so he can help us. He hides us in his strength so he can help us in our weakness. And here's cave conquering conviction number 4. When I'm exhausted, God is exalted. Say that with me right now. When I'm exhausted, God is exalted. Finding refuge in God means you become so immersed in his presence, so convicted of his goodness, so devoted to his lordship that you find even in the cave, it's a perfectly safe place to be because he is with you. And then you understand, here's what you need to understand. God knows a thing or two about caves. Let's fast forward several generations. Jesus Christ, who is called the Son of David. Jesus Christ, the Son of David, suffered like us and suffered for us. No one has ever descended all the way down like Jesus did. The Son of David, Jesus, also lost his position. He lost his status as a teacher. He lost his safety and security. And he not only lost his best friend, he lost all of his friends in one night in spite of his teachings and his warnings. His life too was endangered, and then things really got bad. He went to a cross and died, and all of his dreams and all the dreams that he inspired appeared to die with him. What started out as a shining success ended in such shocking failure. And then they put his body in a cave. Let me say that again. And then they put his body in a cave. I don't think you heard what I just said. And then they put his body in a cave, and that was their biggest mistake. You know why? God does some of his best work in a cave. Amen? I don't know. I don't know what cave you're in right now. Maybe it's a lost job. Maybe it's a failed marriage. Maybe it's a marriage that is failing. Maybe a child whom you love has disappointed you. Maybe your dreams for your children look like they're never going to be fulfilled. Maybe it's become apparent that the greatest longing of your life will never see the light of day. And maybe you're not in a cave at all this morning, and that is so good. Maybe you never have been, but you probably will be. Because sooner or later, everybody logs some cave time. So when your cave time comes, just remember this. God does some of his best work in caves. And in a cave is where God resurrects dead things. I want you to stand with me right now. And I want to share with you a prayer on failure. This is a prayer I ran across several years ago, and I've used several times whenever I speak on the subject of failure. You can bow your heads or you can just look up here, whatever you want to do. But here's what the prayer says. When it looks like I failed, Lord, are you trying to tell me something? For failure does not mean I'm a failure. It does mean I've not yet succeeded. Failure does not mean I've accomplished nothing. It does mean I have learned something. Failure does not mean I've been a fool. It does mean I had enough faith to experiment. Failure does not mean I've been disgraced. It does mean I dared to try. Failure does not mean I don't have it. It does mean I have to do something different. Failure does not mean I'm inferior. It does mean I'm not perfect. Failure does not mean I've wasted my time. It does mean I have an excuse to start over. Failure does not mean I should give up. It does mean I must try harder. Failure does not mean I'll never make it. It does mean I need more patience. Failure does not mean you have abandoned me. It does mean you must have a better idea. Amen? And here's what I know. One more thing. Have to tell you this. Here's what I know. Don't know much, but I know this. If you want to walk on water. You got what? You got to get out of the boat. You got to step out of the boat.